Hi again, I'm Penny and welcome to my YouTube channel, Retire With Me. I've now been retired about 3.5 months. A little more about me, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is equally close to the beaches of North Carolina as it is to the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Raleigh is home to the Hurricanes hockey team and the home of the Duke-UNC basketball rivalry, which is huge. We live right beside a large state park, nature park, and we have access to trails right from our very backyard. I love to hike. It will be very hard to leave this location in the future, which is another retirement topic in a future video. So back to my retirement story. In the last video, I mentioned an unexpected dental procedure. In May of 2024, at a routine dental checkup, my dentist found, after looking at my x-ray, that I had a tooth with internal resorption. This was the tooth. That basically means that the tooth is dissolving itself from the inside out. At some point, the tooth will be painful, and I'd have to do something. If you're lucky, if I'm lucky, a root canal might be possible to save the tooth. Notice that the root canal was the lucky option. If I was not so lucky, the tooth would have to be extracted. Well, my dentist referred me to an endodontist. After talking to the endodontist, I learned that unfortunately for me, I had not just one top front tooth with internal resorption, but I had two. So I had this one and this one. Now that's the canine tooth, but it's pretty close to the front. Also, the internal resorption was too far along for a root canal to be an option. The teeth would have to be extracted. If you're enjoying this, please hit like and subscribe. I am very new to this and I know that this is important, but I keep forgetting it. So please help me out and hit like and subscribe. Now try to picture yourself minus these two teeth. I know that there are worse things, but I was a little bit terrified. I knew nothing about these dental procedures, where the process didn't work for me. Everyone said you'll never leave the office without some kind of temporary solution so that you don't look toothless. What if things didn't work? Not to mention it was supposed to take several months to complete the process. It was terrifying to me. I have a dentist that specializes in cosmetic dentistry. I also had to work with a periodontist. He would be the one to extract the two teeth. Ultimately, the two of them had to work together to come up with a plan. The periodontist assumed that I would replace both teeth with an implant. However, my dentist knew that the best aesthetic solution for me was going to be to have a bridge here and an implant here, with 2 additional veneers in between and surrounding the bridge and implants to ensure that my own teeth matched the shade of the bridge and the implant. It was also important that the implant and the bridge be created at the same time to ensure that the shades of the 2 teeth were the same. Who knew you would have to worry about that? It's kind of like trying to ensure that a paint shade from Lowe's matches a batch created from a different time. I'm glad my dentist knew. I was told that there would always be some temporary solution to replace the 2 missing teeth so that I wouldn't have 2 gaps in my smile. Now, I now know that temporary solutions translate into crowns or flippers or temporary bridges. Now, I knew what a crown was. I've had several of them, but a flipper, a temporary bridge, and this was going to take several months to complete. Given that the extraction of teeth can be a rather intimidating and traumatic process, we decided to extract the 2 teeth at 2 different times. The first one up was the canine tooth here. This is the tooth that would have the implant. The first step was for my dentist to create a flipper, which would be my temporary replacement tooth for that canine. Here is the flipper that I wore during this time. Doesn't look like much, but it did the job. So the next step was for the periodontist to remove the canine tooth. I thought that I'd asked for some sedation to help take the edge off of my nerves, but either I forgot or I was mistaken. because I had no extra sedation. I was very numb. I felt no pain, but I was extremely aware of how much effort it took for the periodontist to remove that tooth. Think about that for a moment. Now, I was sure to bring the flipper with me to the appointment so that when I left, I wouldn't appear minus that tooth. And it worked. It was a bit uncomfortable putting the flipper into a tooth area that had just been extracted, but it worked. It looked like I had a canine tooth. My dentist had warned me that I wouldn't enjoy the experience of wearing a flipper, and boy, was she correct. It was uncomfortable and tight. When I ate, it was best to remove it or just have soup all the time. It kind of made having dinner out with friends a little bit interesting. Finally, it affected my speech. It gave me a lisp, which I was very self-conscious about. Now, I was still working at that time, working remotely, but leading meetings and often on video. I spent much time practicing speaking with the flipper in, but I never managed to correct the lisp. So during this time, I was working totally remotely. Thank you, pandemic. I was totally at home, and I got quite accustomed to not wearing the flipper as it was so uncomfortable. Then one day I was taking an hour break in the afternoon at the park with my husband and my grandson. My husband took a picture. Now, I was very much in the background of that picture, but you could definitely tell in the picture that I was missing a tooth. I was just speaking. I wasn't even smiling, but it was very obvious, and it horrified me. I got used to wearing the flipper. I also knew nothing about dental implants. Now, when you have a tooth extracted in preparation for a dental implant, it takes several months for the bone to heal enough for the implant. I didn't know that. That was a long time to wear a flipper. 7 months later, the bone from the extracted canine tooth had healed sufficiently for the process to continue. The periodontist was up again. The next step for the implant was to insert something called an abutment. Think of this as a screw that's going to screw down into something that they put in the root of that tooth when they extracted it. So the abutment will screw into whatever that device is, and the replacement tooth or crown will go on top of the abutment. This was a big deal for me. Also, the periodontist would also be removing the second tooth with internal resorption, which is the incisor here. Now, I was already missing a top canine tooth. Now I'm about to be missing another top front tooth right in the middle. This was very scary to me. I'm a worrier. I'm a type A personality. Everybody says this is not a big deal, but what if it doesn't work for me? What if I'm minus those two front teeth forever? I was quite worried about the situation. Oh, but this time I asked for a sedative. I learned my lesson the last time. Now, I do want to point out one thing. At the time of this recording, I'm on the other side of this process. In other words, it's now 15 months after the time that the internal resorption was first detected. This is the end result smile. Now back to the story. So I went straight from the periodontist office to my dentist office. As I said, there was a lot of coordination between the dentist and the periodontist as far as back-to-back appointments and that type of thing. Now, I was really out of it, but I do remember that on the way from the periodontist to the dentist, I had looked in the mirror and I smiled. I forced myself to be brave. I wanted to see what it looked like minus the incisor. Now, I was glad I was sedated when I did that. Don't take your teeth for granted, folks. As I said, I was really sedated. When I went to the dentist office, I was there for another 2 hours where they put in the temporary bridge. Honestly, I don't know how they even kept my mouth open. I was so out of it. So I went home and I slept on the couch until 4:30. My first appointment with the periodontist was at 8. I got home from the dentist around lunchtime. When I woke up from my sedation, it was 4:30. It was some good sedation. This is a picture of me on the couch with my puppy, wondering what's wrong with me. When I woke up and looked in the mirror, I was glad the flipper was in, and I did see teeth here where the incisor was, but I didn't love what I saw. Now, I'm really not a complainer, and I knew it wasn't supposed to be perfect, so I was not going to say anything about it. I was just going to live with it. My dentist, who was actually on maternity leave during that temporary bridge appointment, called me later to see how I was. I was honest with her. She ended up replacing the temporary bridge, and what she replaced it with was much better. I was much happier. So the internal resorption was first detected in May of 2024. At the time the second tooth was extracted that we just talked about, it was January of 2025. Now, it wasn't going to take as long for this tooth to heal as it did the tooth that was replaced with the implant. So in a few more months, I'll have a permanent bridge here, and an implant here, and a veneer here, and here. And they'll all be the same color, right? Now, everybody said it was going to be good, but I was still a little bit nervous. Not to mention, how long will the permanent bridge and the implant last? Will I have to go through this again in a few more years? So the temporary bridge was a definite improvement even to my original smile. Other than the uncomfortable flipper, I started to imagine a smile that was nicer than I had ever had. Now, there was a noticeable difference in the length of my original tooth that was between the canine tooth and the first tooth of the bridge. So this tooth was definitely noticeably shorter than the two appliances. My dentist tried twice to correct this by attaching something that made it look like it was the right length, but both times it came out, so I just decided to live with it. So a little diversion back to the retirement story. In early April 2025, 2 months after the second tooth was extracted and the temporary bridge was put in, the company where I worked offered a retirement package to employees over 60. At first, I didn't think much about it. It didn't seem to apply to me, but then I realized I'm 62. It does apply to me. And then I reflected over the last several months. The dental work left me feeling very vulnerable and very aware of how fragile life is. I had prioritized my job for a very long time, and work-life balance was not a skill of mine. I don't blame my company for this. They were a great company. I blame myself for this. It is how I am wired. This time it was dental work. Next time it could be something much worse for myself or a family member. Honestly, this experience helped me realize that retiring now made sense. Now I was all done with the periodontist, and all of the remaining work was up to my dentist. On April 30th of 2025, coincidentally, the last day of my work, yes, that was coincidentally, I had a very complicated appointment where they determined all the specifications for the permanent bridge, the crown on the implant, the veneers, including the shade, the length, and the fit. It was a really complicated appointment. I was as numbed up as I have ever been. When I was done, I was left with, I'm calling it another temporary bridge, but it was really more a model of what the permanent bridge was going to look like. My dentist sent me home for the weekend and told me to spend time looking at my smile with a critical eye to determine if it was right for me. The shade, the length, everything. So I did this. I spent time over the weekend smiling at myself in the mirror, and I actually decided the teeth were a little bit too long for me. Now that might sound odd. Can you imagine your teeth being too long? But they were a little bit too long. I didn't quite trust myself, so I left it up to my dentist. She agreed that they were too long, so she filed them all down, and it was much better. Fast forward a couple of months, and it's June of 2025. Finally, the permanent bridge, the crown on the abutment, and the surrounding veneers were all ready. I was very excited for this appointment. Finally, everything would be in. Now, This work wasn't for the faint of heart either. I do remember when the crown was being screwed onto the abutment here for the implant, that it was quite painful for my gums. I do remember this. But yes, the work was complete. I was pleased with the result, and I was very pleased to be done. So the internal resorption was first discovered in May of 2024. My last appointment was in June of 2025. So from start to finish, this process took just over a year. Now I agreed to let my dentist film me recording a description of this for her social media page. You'll see a link to that in the description below. Finally, if you've enjoyed this story, please click like or subscribe. I would really appreciate it. My hope is that this story might help someone else facing this type of dental work, or maybe help someone else who's thinking about retiring early. Until next time, bye.